second episode of my boat build documentation series. In the last and first episode, I talked about the thought process behind me designing and cutting out this cardboard template of a boat I'm going to attempt to build. So let's get into it. So I extrapolated the design I made on a computer and put it onto cardboard in life size. I then used that piece of cardboard to trace out and cut a piece of foam. This is 1/2-inch foam from Lowe's. Obviously it says Lowe's on it. And now this piece of foam is in the shape of the template I just cut. One thing I didn't record, and I wish I should have, was the building of this lamination table. It's basically just a sheet of plywood that was ripped in half, and I took some 2x4s and made a long table and set it up on sawhorses, and it's a little janky, but it is level. So after I had this table to draw and cut on, I then took some black plastic. I don't remember what mill it is, but it's thick, and I laid it over the table as flat as I could and as tight, and stapled and taped it down. And this is going to allow me to do epoxy work without it sticking to the table. From time to time, my son comes in and gives me assistance when I need it. Okay, and next I'm busting out a package of 1708 that I bought on Amazon. It was the cheapest per square foot bundle I could find. That gave me enough material to get going. The first thing I don't like is this is just folded up. I understand that folding it like that can break the fibers, which can compromise the integrity. Properly shipped fiberglass is rolled up on a roll and put in a tube and sent to you with no folds or creases in it, but we're gonna deal with it. So after I lay it out, I cut it rough. And now I'm tracing the outline with a Sharpie, and I'm gonna trim it close with some scissors. And yeah, that was kind of a pain. Okay, now that everything is cut to size, I'm gonna go mix up my material. I bought the cheapest tabletop epoxy I could find on Amazon, and my decision to use tabletop epoxy was, epoxy's epoxy. And that was my first mistake. The second mistake was measuring it out by weight. It's a 1-to-1 ratio mix from resin and hardener, and one is more dense than the other. And after you do this a few times, you realize that you have less hardener than resin, which means you use more of one than the other instead of a true 1-to-1 ratio by volume. So that was mistake number 2. It didn't really affect anything that I could tell, but I learned this after the fact, and I'm just sharing that with you. Here I am stirring the crap out of it with a stick. I probably will eventually invest in one of those paddle mixers. But in the meantime, this is my first time ever laminating anything with epoxy, and I'm pouring it on, spreading it out with a brush, getting it nice and saturated. Needed some more, so I mixed some more, laying it on. One of the advantages of using a tabletop epoxy is a really slow dry time. So I was concerned about not having enough time to work it, so I thought this might be the ticket, plus it was cheaper. But I come to find out later that the tabletop epoxy actually has less flex, and you may actually want some flex in a structure like a boat. So when it's going, dealing with all the stresses and stuff, it's got a little give and doesn't just crack out when it reaches its maximum level. And anyway, so now I'm taking this fin roller. This is my first time fin rolling. It's actually pretty easy. Just kind of push out the bubbles, don't push too hard. Add more resin where it's dry, but I try to get as even saturation as possible. Taking it all the way to the edges. And yeah, it wasn't that bad. And then I had to let it dry for an entire day. It was tacky 8 hours later. And so I actually had to come back the next day. So here it is dried the next day, and you can see where it's pooled up in one spot and a little lighter in another. So it's just my first time. And I'm actually surprised at how flexible it is. It's a lot heavier, and it's still real flexible. And that was actually kind of concerning me at this point. But when I get the other side on, it stiffens right up. Here's a popsicle stick with some dried resin. You can see it's real flexy. It hasn't hardened. This stuff's supposed to take days, and even weeks to it just gets harder and harder, kind of like cement. I don't think it cures as long as cement. Cement, I think, cures forever. Anyway, it's also real scratchy and sharp. There's lots of pokey things all over the surface. I'm gonna have to sand that down. That's what the edges look like. I've overlapped them. It adheres pretty good. I'm not pulling on it very hard because it will come off. It's actually not some super material as of yet. And it's nice and shiny too. Yeah, it's that tabletop epoxy. I don't know if you can see how rough it is, but that is scratchy. Just the little fibers as you're pushing them around with the brush and the rollers, if they're sticking up, man, they just turn into little spikes. Anyway, I've got this skill saw that I ordered on Amazon. It was cheap, but it's actually pretty rugged and hefty. I can't complain, I really like it. And I got this carbide jigsaw blade from Home Depot. Anyway, I went ahead and started trimming the excess off the edges, which went fine. A little messy. After that, I held it back up to my template to see how close I was. It wasn't as close as I liked, but I figure, you know, I'm not a computer. I'm not a laser-guided CNC machine as much as I want to be. Anyway, it was close enough, so I decided to flip it over and laying out fiberglass for the other side. And same thing, I did a big rough cut, and then I trimmed it up close. Just overhang a little. And then I went to it with the tabletop epoxy. And there I'm flipping it over because I had the chopped strand mat side up, and I decided I wanted it down. I think it is supposed to be down. And this pretty much went the same as the other side, smoothly, saturated, spread it out, fin rolled any of the bubbles out, and then I cleaned my tools with acetone. The next day, and this is starting to already aggravate me, having to wait the entire next day for it to dry. It actually only takes like 15 minutes to roll out a side. I didn't need a 2-hour work time. So then I go ahead and trim the excess off the other side using the jigsaw, but then I decided to go ahead and get a pad sander with some 60 grit and go over the edges to get them smooth, and this actually worked pretty good. I also went over the flat surfaces because it left a bunch of knobby, sharp things poking up. I didn't like it. And I wanted it to be smooth and not catching my clothes. And plus, when I flipped it, it was actually, before I sanded the surface, it was tearing the plastic in the laminating table. It's just not good. I don't know. It's just a byproduct of the process that I hadn't anticipated. But anyway, handled with sandpaper and a shop vac. And with all this second push of effort, we now have our first piece of the boat, which will eventually become the transom. And that's it for now. Subscribe if you want to see more. Thanks for watching.